Hi everybody, my name is Ian Kelmartin. I'm a graduate student at Humboldt State. I developed this presentation with Jay Staten, who couldn't be here today, under the expert guidance of our PIs, Tim Mulligan and Joe Taberzi. We worked with charter fishermen and volunteer anglers to survey the nearshore rocky reef fish communities on the north coast here. So what we were looking for, we wanted to characterize the community, looking at the species of fish that were out there, the number there were, and their size. We want to engage the local fishing communities in the sampling process. And we also wanted to be able to identify the metrics and the techniques that were useful in this round of monitoring for continued monitoring of the marine protected areas. So where we worked out of 4 ports. Up at Crescent City, we studied the Pyramid Point SMCA. Right here out of Eureka, we went down to South Cape Mendocino. We went down out of Shelter Cove to Sea Lion Gulch, right up there off of Point Gorda. And then out of Fort Bragg, we went to 10 Mile State Marine Reserve. So the sorts of fish we were looking at, they're obviously associated with this 10 to 50 meter rocky reef habitat that we were surveying. Rockfish, a lot of rockfish. We saw 14 species. It's a lovely yellow eye rockfish we tagged out there. Our hexagrammids, lingcod, and kelp greenling. And sculpins. We have a nice catazon down on the bottom there. A lot of these fish are long-lived, slow to reproduce, and potentially very place-centric. They stay where they're at, so there's a lot of potential for them to be helped by these marine protected areas. And they're also an important economic, cultural, and recreational resource up here on the north coast. We have some challenges. Many of you live up here, so you know what the deal is. It's remote sites, the weather's often bad up there. This is the port of Shelter Cove. You'll notice there's no docks. I took this picture from the boat that we sampled on. I'm getting hauled out of the water on a tractor. And so there's not a lot of infrastructure to support research vessels up here, which makes this collaborative method engaging the charter boats really, really useful. So we worked with them and with volunteer anglers for the community. And what we did, we used standardized gear and standardized time in an MPA and a reference site out of each port to gauge the fish communities in these MPAs. Some of the benefits of collaborative fisheries research. One of those main goals I mentioned on that first slide, it's a great way to engage with the communities. We're working directly with the charter captains and with fishermen out of these ports. And it's also got some very practical advantages to us. It's flexible. If we're chartering a research vessel, we have to say, maybe a week in advance, more than that, okay, we need this weather window. Once we built the relationship with these captains, we could call them up 2 days out and say, hey, it looks like there's a weather window. Can you take us? And sometimes they'd call us and be like, hey, the weather looks good. I don't have a charter plan. Let's go do some science. So that was awesome. It also mimics sport fishing, which is really the primary fishing pressure on many of these species up here. And it's comparable to other studies like this in California, most notably the Central California Collaborative Fisheries Research Project, which our protocols were based on. So at each port, as I mentioned, we had an MPA and a reference site. And at each site, we threw a grid over it, 500 meter by 500 meter boxes. And out of those boxes that had more than 20% rocky bottom, we selected 4 randomly. That's what these are. And then in each of those boxes, we called them stations, we conducted 45 minutes of fishing, which consisted of at least 3 drifts over suitable rocky habitat. And we did this in 2014 and 2015. We visited each site 3 times in 2014 and twice in 2015. We use gear that if you go fishing for rockfish and lingcod, this will look very familiar. These are schematics of the fishing gears we used. We had 4 anglers on each boat, plus a sampler who tagged and measured the fish, and a data recorder who wrote the information down. So on each fishing line, we had one that was 2 shrimp flies. That's these up here, just hook, little feathers, shiny things. A baited shrimp fly, which is these, plus a piece of squid mantle on them. A shrimp fly, and then a plastic jig, that's these on the bottom. They're great for lingcod. And then another piece of gear with a shrimp fly, plus a metal jig on the bottom of there. They caught cabezon real well and many of the larger rock fishes. So we caught a fish, brought it aboard, measured it to your total length. That's a nice little, or fork length rather. That's a nice little board. That's my colleague Jay putting in a T-bar anchor tag. You can see it in this little lingcod here. And we release them. This is a descending crate. It's just a milk crate with a PVC full of sand around it. Put fish in the basket, send it back down to depth to recompress them to make sure they don't suffer any barotrauma injuries. So, if all works out well, we're going to get to see what this looks like. Ah, there it is. All right. Oof. So close. Yeah, you got to look over there. It's some real spatial awareness training. All right, so this is, we worked on these small boats. This is up off of Point Gorda. There's a canary coming aboard, China coming aboard. Drew here is measuring here. I wish it wasn't shuttering like that. Nice China rockfish there. You can see everybody's involved. That's a deckhand in the blue hat. He's measuring. You're going to see the captain run out. There's Katie to get another fish. So when it was hitting, it could get quite chaotic, but a lot of fun. Good sampling times. So what did we find? What did we do? We took 40 trips. We tagged 4,248 individuals of 22 species. Like I said, we found 14 rockfish species. We tagged just under 3,500 fish. We engaged 12 different captains or deckhands and 40 different volunteer anglers, which accounted for 80 volunteer days of fishing effort. That was half the total fishing effort on the project, the rest of which was done by undergraduate technicians. And the record for our most days volunteered was a gentleman from right here in Eureka who fished with us 8 days, and he loved it. He came to every port we sampled out of. It's awesome. So what did we catch? Far and away, black rockfish accounted for 39% of our catch in numbers, followed by blue rockfish, then lingcod, 15%. We are really happy to see canary rockfish come in at number 4 in numbers. We're actually, just this year, going to get to keep some of them again. That fishery's been closed for a long time. Yellowtail rockfish, copper, and then 10% kind of grab bag these other species. So we break it down by site. All right, let's walk through this figure a little bit. This axis is catch per unit effort, and in this case, that's the number of fish caught per angler per hour. And then we're further broken down by site. So our Crescent City sites, the MPA reference, Eureka MPA reference, so on. And so we look at this and we want to ask, okay, what's the difference between these sites and why is it that way? So we're doing an MPA study. Is it the MPA that's making the difference? So even just looking at this first one, MPAs, a little bit lower catch rate than the reference site. Here MPA is a little bit better. Here MPA is way better. And then here MPA is a little worse. So there isn't this sort of systematic, the MPA's got a bigger catch rate that you'd expect if you're seeing effects of protection. Now, what really comes out is that the further we get away from a fishing port, the higher the catch rate is. Makes sense, right? People aren't going to spend the gas to get out there. It could be a little bit more dangerous. And this Sea Lion Gulch site, you have to launch at Shelter Cove off a tractor and then go 20 miles north up the coast to what the captains and the fishermen down there say is like some of the most unpredictable waters in California. So this could be pretty close to, a virgin fishery. So the other elements in here, these colors represent the different species of fish, and that's every fish that we caught that consisted of more than 1% of our catch. So we have black rockfish, blue rockfish, lingcod, canary, China's green, copper, quillback, and vermilion. And it was just something that stuck out to me is what really put this Shelter Cove site, Sea Lion Gulch, over the top was this tremendous amount of black and blue rockfish. Something that I was happy to see that Sean mentioned earlier today that he saw was this trend where from north to south, blue rockfish started to take up more of the catch relative to black rockfish. Something that we also noticed. And as I was listening to Eric's talk and the gears started grinding, something else that we noticed is in 2015 that blue rockfish overall accounted for more of our total catch than black rockfish compared to 2014. So also when we're looking at MPA effects, we want to think one of the signs can be a difference in the size of the fish. If the fish aren't going to get caught, they're going to grow larger. So we're asking that question, hey, are any of the fish longer in these areas? And the answer is, not really. We have some stars where there's some significant differences up there. In Crescent City, blue rockfish are a little bit bigger, black rockfish off the Cape. But again, there isn't this sort of systematic pattern where the MPAs have larger fish. This is pretty cool. We sent out tag return, these tags, almost 3,500. I think I might have turned that off. Yeah, sweet. Sent out 3,500 tags, got 18 back. For the math whizzes out there, that's 0.5% tag return rate. We got 9 black rockfish, 7 lingcod, a Pacific halibut, and a yellow eye rockfish. And except for 4 black rockfish, just about all the fish we saw stayed right where they were at. One of the lingcod moved about 10 kilometers. So what's interesting about these black rockfish, which is what I have plotted on this map here, is they all moved north. And these 3 are about 300 to 350 kilometer displacement. And they did those treks in between 620 and 650 days. And then the real star here is this one black rockfish that traveled from the South Cape Mendocino SMR all the way up to off of Willapa Bay in southern Washington. We figure that's about 680 kilometers. And I wrote this down so I could get it right. And I did that in 586 days. So more than 1 kilometer a day. That's a fish that bag. That's a pretty determined movement. And I'm curious that as we get to look at this oceanographic data and other things, if all this poleward flow that Eric was talking about, maybe that has something to do with it. It's all these patterns. And the Central California Collaborative Fisheries Project also sees about half of their black rockfish tag returns make this leap to the north. And what's interesting, the other half stay right at home. All right. So some key findings. Distance to port has a large, strong effect. A very strong effect on the relative abundance. And that's something to consider in the future as we're selecting reference sites for further study. And right now we don't have much evidence for MPA effects, but we wouldn't expect to. Like I mentioned before, these fish are long-lived, many, many decades, slow to reproduce. And the literature says it's going to be at least 15 or 20 years before we expect to see any sort of MPA effects. Down in the Central Coast, there's an MPA that was put in the 70s that you're starting to see more and larger fish. So perhaps a harbinger of things to come. And of course, volunteers like free fishing trips, they all had a good time. And the captains, some of them were a little bit skeptical of us to start out with, but we developed really wonderful working relationships with them. And so we've been lucky enough to be awarded some funding to continue our work at 2 sites. This summer, we're going to be back out at South Cape Mendocino and 10 Mile SMR. We're going to be sending some data to the National Marine Fisheries Service to help them assess these nearshore fish stocks. We're going to do a little fun project, build a video lander to drop down. That'll help us figure out if our hooks are catching everything that's down there, if we're getting a nice representative sample. And we're hoping that there will be a good comprehensive program of long-term monitoring to come that is well-funded and sustainable and scientifically sound. So of course, on a collaborative project, we have a lot of people to thank. Jay Staten, the other grad student on the project, and Drew Barrett, who quite literally taught us all to fish. Tim Mulligan, Joe DeBercy, all our captains and crew and volunteers, Ocean Science Trust for funding, and of course all the very supportive fisheries grad students out there. So with that, if you want to come fish with us this summer, you can email me at northcoastcfr@gmail.com, and I'm happy to take any questions.